Hello, my name is Pat Sharp. I'm the clinic director at Neuroeducation, and this is my third video in a series on dyslexia. And in this little short video, we're going to be talking about how to remediate or treat different forms of dyslexia. So I'm the clinic director here. My name is Pat, and I started this business 36 years ago in Spokane, Washington. We have a wonderful group of counselors and psychologists and master level teachers offering assessment and treatment for learning and behavioral challenges. The teachers, of course, work within the learning clinic, and this whole area of dyslexia is one of their specialties in terms of working with learning disabilities. So we had talked before about the three different kinds of dyslexia, one which couldn't handle instruction through a phonetic approach called phonetic dyslexia, and another one that couldn't remember graphic images of words long enough to kind of establish a growing sight vocabulary. That one was called dyseidetic dyslexia, and then the last one was more of a comprehension problem, and it's referred to as surface dyslexia because on the surface it doesn't look like they have a reading problem, but they don't understand what they read. So the most important piece about all of this was the fact that when you're working with someone who doesn't have all the neurological links available, probably through genetic reasons, sometimes through injury, but most often genetic. There'll be a family member, a dad, a mom, an aunt, an uncle, somebody in the family tree who had a very similar kind of problem with reading. So it makes sense to use their strengths to teach this new, complicated, complex skill, not using their weaknesses, because it's hard to learn new things through your weakness. And the other piece is it's so important that children feel successful and smart, and they equate learning how to read and do math, but mostly learning how to read with being smart. So if that doesn't happen easily for them, somewhere around that age of 5 to 9-ish or so, they really take a hit in terms of their emotional well-being. So don't totally abandon their weakness. If it's phonics, do some work on phonics, but don't primarily aim at just doing that because it won't be successful and they won't feel successful. And if they don't feel successful, they give up. And any normal person does when they can't figure out how to do something, they give up. So in the dysphonetic kind, the kind of treatment idea that seems to work the very best is a modeled reading kind of approach. And basically, this is my term for any number of programs that are out there that allow the child to listen and follow along and learn to identify words by their whole graphic image. By the way, that's how all good readers eventually do it anyway. It's just because our language is phonetic, it is based on letters and sounds for the letters. The easiest way to learn it is through phonics, if you can do it that way. But if you can't, then this modeled approach works really, really well. So you can even do it with a voice dictation system of any kind on your smartphone or on your laptop or even the old-fashioned tape recorder. So step one is, or before you start step one, you have to record a segment of text. Now make sure it's of a high interest to the kid. It's got to be something he's or she's very intrigued with. It might be when they're younger about dinosaurs, or it might be about, if they're a little older, racing cars or sports people or something that's really interesting to them. So you're going to record a small segment of that. And that small segment can be anywhere from about a 5-minute recording to as long as maybe a 15-minute recording. But not a whole lot at first because you want them to feel successful. The main goal here is changing their emotional feeling about their ability to learn to read. So when you make your recording, you want to turn the book or the text upside down to you. Because if you turn it upside down, you are much more likely to read it in little clumps or not read it just lickety-split fast. I don't know if you've ever been in a foreign country and listened to little children speak the language of the country that you're in, and there's no pauses. You can hear, which makes it very difficult for you to make out any of the separate words that you might know if they were speaking a whole lot more slowly. Well, the same thing happens when you're trying to learn how to read a code. You need to leave not a space between every word like that, but more like this. where there's a pause after every set of a few words. Period. You'll also have to put in the punctuation, which is a good idea to do because they get used to then understanding what the punctuation means and that the black marks mean something. So the first step for the child is he just follows along while he's playing the audio. It's not coming out of his mouth yet. He's just listening and making sure his eyeballs are on the same words that he hears you reading. And at first, it might be helpful for you to be, running your finger or a pointer just above the words, because above the words is important because all the critical features that make letters what they are and make them recognizable, they're all on the top half of the line of print. If you point underneath the words, the bottom part of the letters doesn't give you the critical information that really differentiates one from another. If you'd like to try that out, just take any magazine and an index card and cover up a half of a line of print with the top half showing, and you'll be able to read it. But if you cover up the top half, where all the critical features are, and you leave the bottom half exposed, chances are won't be able to read it. So, step one, using your finger to make sure they're on the words that you're saying, they read along. And they may do that, twice today, twice tomorrow, maybe twice the next day. The second step will kind of automatically happen, and that's where their voice will start going with your voice while they're looking at the text. And again, they can do this anywhere from 3 to 5-ish or more times. And then finally, you ask him, and the child will do this by themselves, to just read it by themselves without the tape going. Now, if they're kind of reluctant about that, you can always just keep lowering the volume on the playback, on the recorded version, so he feels some support underneath him, but it's not real obvious until finally there's no input at all, and he's just reading it, which will make him feel absolutely incredible. You do not have to read an entire book in this way. It's just segments of a book, any segment of a book. And then for fun, just read the rest of it to him if he's really intrigued in what it is. Harry Potter is still really popular, but you don't have to read the whole tome. And it is a tome. Most of those books are 700 pages or more. But if you just put an exciting little part on tape and read for several chapters, and then put another little segment on tape for him and read several more chapters, you get the idea. Anyway, they get exposed to thousands and thousands of words that they wouldn't otherwise be reading because they're not seeing them, because they can't sound them out and recognize them in that way. So that's a wonderful idea for the child that's struggling with phonics, otherwise known as trouble with phonetic dyslexia. Okay, now the next kind is a dyseidetic kind, and this is where you'll recall from my video prior to this one about diagnosing dyslexias, that they are unable to recall or remember or do it very well, the image of what words look like. So they may know a word like grandfather on one line, and 2 lines later that word shows up again and they don't recognize it. They have to try and sound it out again. So really their strength is their phonics. So in that case, you really, really want to aim at filling in all the gaps. And phonics is kind of like building a brick wall. You need as many of the bricks as you can possibly get. All the separate sounds of the consonants, the vowels, the short vowel sounds, the long vowel sounds, the consonant digraph sounds, the consonant blend sounds. It's more than you can just know, because what happens is as you learn to read, you no longer depend on those phonics rules, as it were, and you look at the words and you just read them because you recognize them. And that's what all good readers do. But here's some programs I've listed that are excellent phonics kind of approaches for learning to read. The Linda Mood Bell phoneme sequencing program called LIPS is a number one. It's just a great program. Orton Gillingham has been around for many, many, many years. It's very good. Hooked on Phonics is a great program. It too has been around for a long time. The Spalding method, again, a strong approach. Any one of these is terrific. The Reading Mastery program, it used to be called DISTAR way back in the old days, by McGraw-Hill, and it's also very good. So these kinds, and if you go online and just look up phonics programs, you'll find all kinds of things like this one that I found here with the icon. Okay, so that's if they're not remembering and they can't remember what words look like as a whole. Now, when you're doing other work with them to aim at their weakness, which is recognizing words as a whole gestalt, you don't want to really ever just have a separate word on a card all by itself, because we don't read that way. We don't read one word at a time. So allow them to use the context of language to help them figure out that one word. So if you're going to do flashcards, make sure it's a little phrase and you've got the target word underlined. Say the target word is was. So your little sentence, your little phrase on the card might say, he was at my party, and you've underlined was. So at first, when you're going through the cards, you read all words except the underlined words. So you'd read, he at my party, and then your child says was. That's a really good exercise for them, and eventually, not very long into it, they'll be able to kind of recognize the card and read the whole thing. Okay, the last one is surface dyslexia, and this is the one where they don't look like they have a reading problem. They can bark at the print beautifully, say all the words right. So the best way here is to teach them by modeling for them how to translate one sentence at a time when they're reading. So for example, I took this out of a textbook about geography. In Australia, the desert stretches for most of the width of the continent. Now that's what the book said. If you were going to translate it, you would read it out loud like that to the child, and he can read it perfectly. He could read it for you. And then you translate it. You say it as if you're saying it in another language. So I might say, there's a lot of desert in Australia, and it practically fills up the whole width. It fills up how wide the whole continent is. And it doesn't have to be perfect English. You're not writing it. You're just talking. It's your translation. So what this does is it forces them to try and grapple with, what? What did that say? What's that mean? So gradually you keep adding sentences. You start with just one sentence at a time. And then pretty soon you're doing 2 sentences before you translate. And it's okay to translate those 2 sentences just into one thought, like one sentence. And then pretty soon you're up to 3, and then pretty soon it's a paragraph. And finally, after many, many, many weeks, maybe months, you can move to trying to do a whole page at a time. And once they get there, you've pretty much got it. And some people can make that transition and get how to do that. You can tell this is a lot of extra work to do this. We automatically do it. We don't even think about it. We're translating it in our minds as we read it just the way it is. But they have to make this conscious effort to translate it. So, okay, what's next is trying to figure out, which kind of dyslexia your child has. And if you're stumped or if you're stuck, feel free to check out our website for our business or give us a call. We'd be glad to help. If you're anywhere in the vicinity of Spokane, Washington, so it's possible you might want to schedule an appointment for your child to be evaluated. We can certainly do that. Or maybe we can help you find someplace close to where you live that could do something similar. So we look forward to helping you. Keep in mind that learning to read is kind of like building a cake. It's not like building a sandwich. Building a sandwich is having all these separate, identifiable components, parts, like phonics, like the sounds of consonants would be the bread, and maybe the mayonnaise would be the sound of short vowels, and maybe the piece of lettuce would be the sound of the long vowels, and maybe the ham or turkey would be the vowel digraphs, and so on. They're all separate and individually identifiable. But really good reading is more like building a cake, where you do have a certain set number of ingredients that are important, that are necessary, but you don't have to have all of the ingredients. You just have to have the basic ingredients to create a cake that works, so reading works. Because once you put them together and they get all mixed up, you can't any longer pick them out in isolation. And that's why if I gave a phonics test to most good reading adults, they'd flunk it because they don't use that anymore. So we don't need phonics once we learn to read. It's helpful for spelling, but that's a whole other issue. And spelling is another thing I'll do some teaching training videos on because that's a really interesting area too. Okay, it's been very enjoyable. I hope you got something out of today. We look forward to hearing from you. Bye.